Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sig Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? We have a great artist with us today. I love his work on X-Men. I love his work on Thor. Let him know who we got, man.
Yo, man, today we got artist Russell Dauterman joining us today. But before we chat with Russell, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right, our next guest. His work can be seen in Nightwing, Cyclops, and a whole lot of Thor. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you artist Russell Dauterman. What's up, Russell? How you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us, man. We're going to just dive right on in. We got quite a few questions. Russell, since it's your first time joining us, we like to get your comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comics?
Well, it was after a number of years of, working on my portfolio and going to comic book conventions, trying to meet every editor that would talk to me. And, I would do the game where you go to these conventions and most of the publishers will do some form of portfolio review. So I would, drop off, copies of my samples to every publisher. And, one of the first reviews I had was with Marvel, and it went really well. And I very naively came away from that thinking, oh, well, I'm going to email them next week and I'm going to be, drawing the X-Men pretty soon. And that didn't happen. And I needed years more work and, to improve. But after a while of doing that whole process, I did get my first gig, and that was with Boom Studios, that I'm very grateful to them. And it was on a book called Supurbia, which was sort of like Desperate Housewives, but superheroes. And I worked on that for a few years and kept in touch with, the contacts I'd made and continued to make at Marvel and DC. And in 2013, I was wrapping up that Boom Studios gig, and I went to New York Comic Con. And, nothing was really biting at, Marvel and DC, which was always my dream to draw those characters. And so I was like, well, let me just try to give this one last big shot. And so I thought, well, what's, the best thing that I could draw? And so I did this print of the X-Men the Animated Series team. And, something I'd loved since childhood. That's how I was introduced to superheroes. That's what led me to comic books. And so I put everything into this piece and took it to New York Comic Con, and that generated a lot of interest at my table because, that show obviously has tons of nostalgia and tons of fans. And it also brought editors to my table who then could see that I could do this other stuff from, sample pages and work I had published. And that led me to getting my first, big 2 superhero job. And that was at DC on 2 issues of Nightwing.
Russell, you touched a little bit about Supurbia, your work for Boom Studios, and that's a big project too. Can you tell us what sparked that idea to work on that creator-owned comic?
Well, that's not, it is creator-owned, but not by me. That's a Grace Randolph project that was in the works before I came to it. So she had that concept, and I did design all the characters. So that's sort of where I entered the picture. And then I worked with her and the editors to design all the characters and the look of everything. And then I drew that book.
Before comics, you had a job as a costume illustrator. What kind of work responsibilities does a costume illustrator have? And how did that lead into your career in comics? Or did it any? No,
it definitely did. Generally, a costume illustrator works with a costume designer for, generally you use an illustrator for film and TV projects. And sometimes costume designers don't draw, or they are have too many other plates spinning to spend time doing renderings of the costumes. So they'll hire an illustrator who they will say, this is the actor for this character, this is sort of the vibe of the character, and I'm picturing them in this jacket and these pants and these shoes and maybe a shirt that's kind of like this. And then the illustrator takes all of that and creates a drawing or rendering that then you could show a director or the actor, etc. And eventually you could give that drawing to tailors and etc. to have the costume made. So right out of school, I was doing a little bit of that, and I worked on briefly the first Captain America movie. And I did, Marvel has their incredible concept artists that do a lot of that work. And so I was working with one of the costume designers who was designing things like the USO girls in like the Captain America stage show, or the Howling Commandos. I did some sketches of characters like that. And when I was doing that job, I sort of thought that would be a lane for me, that sort of illustration job. Even though comic books had always been sort of in the back of my mind, I actually interned at Marvel when I was in college, and with the idea that I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I came away from that experience thinking I wasn't good enough to do that. And so I kind of pursued other things I was interested in, but doing that Captain America job rekindled the sort of fire to do the comic book stuff. And crucially, it got me in as a professional to San Diego Comic-Con, which then I was able to go to and bring a portfolio, and that's how that whole journey started. So it did lead into it.
Russell, you have an extensive career at Marvel within the Thor mythos. Start off with telling us what that experience was like spending years in Asgard.
That was great. I wasn't a huge Thor fan before coming to that. I had read and loved the Olivier Coipel, J. Michael Straczynski Thor. And when I got approached for that job was when Jason Aaron was doing his God of Thunder run, which I thought was incredible. I thought that was the best book Marvel was publishing, and I really liked that. But I had been, growing up, a huge fan of She-Ra and He-Man. And so I saw in Thor a lot of that DNA, and I certainly tried to put a lot of that into my work because that's, sort of etched into my brain from a very early age. So I was really excited about it. My initial thought was, because our run was about Thor Odinson no longer feeling that he was worthy, and Jane Foster becoming Thor with his blessing in his place. And my first thought was, is anyone going to care? Because it's not, the Thor that everybody likes. And so I was really surprised and delighted that people took to it as much as they did. And, that the biggest thing I took away from it was, because of the sensitive subject matter that she was battling cancer at the same time as, being a superhero, a lot of people came to us and sent us messages about, relating to that or having a loved one that this resonated with. So that was really meaningful, on top of just getting to draw incredible characters and all this fantasy stuff, and getting to design all the elves and fire demons and all of that stuff was really thrilling for me. And it was pretty incredible, especially now when things get rebooted so quickly. Like there's a new #1 constantly.
Right.
Seems. Yep. It was nice that series ran for so long, like between, I feel like that was about 4 years that I was on that, and then another for War of the Realms, which kind of capped it off. But for Jane's story, it really had a beginning, middle, and an end. Like you can pick up those volumes and it's one story with the same creative team for most of it. Of course, there were fill-in artists and different arcs and some incredible people that came in, but I was happy to be there for most of it. And I'm really proud of that.
Russell, can you tell us what else went into the process of designing Jane Foster's Thor costume? You talked a little bit about She-Ra. Was there any other aspects that influenced you?
Yeah, that was actually designed by Assad Ribic before I came on board, because she first appeared in the last issue of his run with Jason on Thor God of Thunder. So my main change to it was kind of She-Ra-fied it, as I made the hair a lot bigger and longer, which is something I want to do. But yeah, he did an incredible job in doing that. And yeah, that was a gift that I got when I started it.
What's the difference between character design and designing costumes for comics versus film? Is there any difference?
In comics, you don't have to worry about making it. So that's really freeing. You can, I try to think about how the clothes would be constructed and how they would move on the body, what different fabrics have different weights, all of those things. But, for one of the later arcs of Thor, I got to design some Shi'ar gods. And, those characters and those costumes do not have to abide by any laws of physics. They don't have to have seams. They don't have to look like clothes. And it was really freeing in things like that, where you can just make something a glowing color, and you can have things just floating around somebody's head, or doing all this stuff that is completely impractical but makes sense and looks cool on a comic book page, but might be difficult to pull off on screen.
So Russell, we just had the Met Gala recently. I wanted to talk about your work on the Hellfire Gala, and you designing all the costumes for the X-Men characters. What was the main inspiration for those costumes for each X-Men?
Yeah, that was hugely exciting. So like I said, I'd been an X-Men fan since I was 7 years old, and really wanted to draw those characters, and especially to design them, since I'm been interested in that. And so Jerry Duggan, who was writing the Marauders X-Men book that I did the covers for, he sort of spearheaded the X-Men's Hellfire Gala, which, like you said, was a take on the Met Gala, where the mutants would have their own version of that. And he and the X-Men editor, Jordan White, and Jonathan Hickman, who was showrunning the line at that point, asked me to design the bulk of the costumes for that event, which I was thrilled to do. And they gave me some varying degrees of notes, to start with. Like for Storm, they said, we don't have anything specific in mind, but it might be cool if she was wearing weather. For Jean Grey, they said, this is open-ended, but just stay away from Phoenix stuff. For Rachel Summers, that one was pretty fully formed, because they wanted a update on her Hound look from the 80s. So it varied in terms of how much input they had, but generally it was open-ended, and that gave me a lot of leeway. And my general thought was that I wanted those costumes to feel like mutant fashion, and mutant superhero costumes that were elevated to a fashion level, as opposed to just human clothes in X-Men colors, if that makes sense.
Right.
High fashion superhero costumes is what I was going for. So, that Storm costume was something I had sketched out years earlier, just as my ideal Storm costume, if I ever got a chance to design her in the future. And so when they said, oh, what if she was wearing weather, I had designed a fabric cape for that costume. So I was like, oh, well, what if we got rid of that cape and instead there's just a black cloud around her to kind of mimic the cape, and then there's yellow lightning running through to look like her traditional gold trim. For Jean Grey, again, that was sort of my ideal Jean Grey costume, and then fashioned up with an enormous train, and it was backless and the high heels, and she's using her telekinesis to hold up these giant shards that look like an X over her head. So I tried to incorporate the superpowers into them. With Emma Frost, they had sort of casually mentioned that she would have 3 different looks, and I designed all 3. And then when I did, they were like, "We didn't think you would design all 3. You could have just done 1." But I was really excited to do it. And my favorite one of hers is, since she can turn her skin into diamond, I thought, well, she's her own accessory. Like, she doesn't need a lot more than that. So she's essentially nude, but completely diamond, so it doesn't look, vulgar. And then she's wearing these diamond strands to cover her front and her back. So that was another way to incorporate the powers into it and into something, above all, what would the character wear? And that's definitely something that she would wear. So yeah, that was an incredible experience. And then they brought me back to do designs for year 2 and 3, and a lot of other artists all 3 years did designs, and it was really a special thing to be a part of.
Russell, we know you do a lot of covers nowadays. We want to ask a process question of laying out a page. What's your process in laying out a page, and how tight can some deadlines be?
With covers, the deadlines are usually pretty good. For the last few years, I've been the cover artist for the Scarlet Witch series. And Wanda's one of my favorites, and I love doing all that witchy supernatural stuff. So that's really probably my favorite work I've done. But since we know that's a monthly book, I know I have one due every month, and I know it's due at this time every month. So, and we've started those fairly early, and the editors and Steve Orlando, the writer, send me briefs for what they might want the cover to be, or sometimes he'll send me his outline for the whole arc, and the editors will chip in with other additional thoughts. So I'll know kind of in advance, and I can plan. Other times, they'll say, "Oh, do you want to do this variant cover?" And it's kind of tight. We need it next week. And those are usually a no for me, because I'm. It takes me a while to do something good. But yeah, it sort of varies. But no matter what, you start with the brief from the editor, and sometimes it's open-ended, sometimes it's real specific, and then I gather reference, so anything that might inspire me, and then for every figure you see, there's probably a reference photo of me doing that pose. Usually very an embarrassing photo of me trying to do those poses, and that really helps to that's just the way and I'm sure most artists were trained to draw, is you look at a model or you look at something and you draw what you see. So that always helps. And then I do up a rough sketch, and I'll send that in to the editors, and for these ongoing books, the writer gets CC'd on that too. And then they'll give feedback. They'll send it to some other folks at Marvel who will give feedback. And then I do everything digitally, so I pencil it, but it's not really penciling, it's just sort of a rough drawing. And then I do the polish drawing or the inking, and then I color it and send it in.
When you're doing interiors and stuff like that, do you have to send in a certain amount of pages at a time? Do they give you a deadline for that? Because like you said, with covers, you have a little bit more wiggle room, and they may even give you an overview on what you might be encountering. But as far as the interiors, what do they expect from you in within a month? Do you need all 22 pages at the end of the month, or do you give it to them piecemeal, or How does that normally work?
Yeah, well, they'll set a schedule, like when you take on a project, either if it's one issue or you're an ongoing artist or whatever, Marvel will work out the timetable. So, they'll do all the math. So it's, if you need to do 5 issues and it takes you this long to do it, then you need to start it over here. And so then we'll have all that, we'll get that all sorted out. And it varies depending on the artist, how long it's gonna take, how many weeks or whatever, but it works, the rest of the process works kind of the same as the cover, where, I'll get the script and then I'll break that down into roughs, rough pages that get sent in to the editor and the writer, who will chime in with any thoughts. Usually I'll do all the roughs, and then send all those in, get any feedback on that, and then I usually, for a full issue, it depends on the editor. Some editors want you to check in, especially earlier in my career. They're like, oh, can you send us 5 pages when you have 5 done? Can you send us the next 5, etc. Right. Nowadays, the editors will just send me them all, when you're done, or inking them. Or, I generally don't color my interior work. I color my covers, but my interior work usually gets colored by Matt Wilson, who's one of the best colorists around. And so I'll be talking to him, and if he needs pages earlier, I'll send in the first half, and then he can start working on those while I'm finishing the rest, that kind of thing.
Russell, the Marvel art of Russell Dauterman was recently released, and which begged the question, like, who makes the decision to release these kind of books, and what does it feel like as an artist to have your work featured, like just as a published book itself, just your work?
I love it so much. I'm so thrilled with that book. I can't even tell you. Like, the Clover Press partnered with Marvel to do this series of art of books. They've had several Marvel artists, and now they're branching out into DC. They just did, or they're doing Jorge Jimenez, who's huge, and I love his work. But Clover's doing an incredible job just printing these books. Like, I've never seen my work printed so nicely, and they do the red foil around the edges, and it has a little bookmark in it, and I was over the moon when I got it. But it's incredible to have all the work in one place and to have it presented. It's really a coffee table art book, so there's no word balloons or logos or whatever. It's like just the art, and then I get to put designs in there. So there's got the X-Men designs and Thor and Scarlet Witch, and there's some process stuff in there. So like everything I was just talking to you guys about, like you can see those steps. All my costumes covers are in there. I've been doing this whole series of covers that takes one character, like the Cyclops one just came out yesterday, where you see him and then all the costumes he's had for the past 60 years or whatever. Anyway, so all those are in there in a nice gallery that you can see them all together. Except that one, because it just came out, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I was really thrilled about it. I'm so glad they wanted me to be involved, and I'm really glad they let me be involved. Like, I picked all the pieces and I sequenced them, and I worked with their designers. They did an incredible design, and then they were very kind to listen to any notes I had, and really got to be involved and make it exactly what I wanted it to be, and I think what they wanted it to be. So yeah, I'm really proud of it.
Fantastic. And what advice would you give aspiring artists trying to break into comics? It seemed like you always wanted to be a comic book artist pretty much your whole life, and you finally got in. What advice would you give a fellow aspiring artist?
I would say, something that really sucked when I was trying to break in was that you would put a lot of work into your samples or the things you were sending, and you craft the nice email and whatever, and then you hear nothing. And so what I would tell someone, and I'm a hypocrite because I'm not this at all, but just be patient and be patient, be polite, and be persistent is something I think C.B. Cebulski, the editor-in-chief of Marvel, has said before. And those things are really true. Just keep making your work better, keep putting it out there. And these editors and the people you're sending it to are very busy, they're overworked, and they don't have time to respond to everything. But that the editor I had that first review with years later was the one that hired me for my first job at Marvel. And there were years in there where I didn't hear from him, but he was getting those things, he was seeing them. And when the time was right, so to speak, I heard back from him. And so it can be really frustrating when you're trying to be heard and trying to get your stuff seen and you feel like no one's paying any attention. But if you keep putting the effort into the work and keep putting yourself out there, that's what's going to get you there in the end.
Russell, we're on our very last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming projects, any new appearances, any other stories you want to tell us?
Just today I revealed my latest of those costumes covers. This one's Magic, Ileana Rasputin. That one will be out in August. And then this month, as we're recording, which is May, so probably by the time someone's seeing this, it'll be out. But the new Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries, I'm doing the covers for that. And it's sort of a continuation of where Wanda's story was, but a jumping on point. And it's Vision's sort of return to his all-white look from the 80s, or now from the MCU, that I did it's essentially his design from the current Avengers run, but I turned it into the white version and tweaked it for that. So yeah, that's probably all I can talk about right now, but that's my next cover project that's should be out now.
Well, thank you so much, Russell, man. This was fantastic. A lot of great insight. Just know you always have a home here on the Sig Slayers station.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Russell Dauterman. We are out. Peace. Sig Slayers.